Well, good morning, everyone. I pray that things are going well for you and yours as we continue. I was just looking at we're like in entering into our 10th week of this shutdown, and it's been really interesting to see how this has affected us and individuals. In fact, I have had a lot of people ask me if I think the coronavirus, or this pandemic as it's called, is a sign of the last times, because they make reference, of course, to Jesus' prophecy that in the end times there will be pestilences. In the context of, especially of Matthew 24, the pestilences, which is essentially a pandemic as we're talking about it now, is something that he said would be part of the cycle of life leading up to the end times. But he said these are not the signs of the end. And so if the pandemic itself is not a sign of being in the end times, how should we understand the current COVID-19, or as I call it, COVID-19 48 pandemic, or panic, more likely? And I think it falls into the category of 2 Thessalonians 2:11, where Paul made this statement. He said, "For this reason God will send them a powerful delusion that they would believe the lie." I think I like the way the NASB translates it. Said, "For this reason God will send upon them a deluding influence so that they will believe what is false." And again, in the Amplified Version, it reads, "Therefore God sends upon them a misleading influence, a working of error, and a strong delusion to make them believe what is false." And I think the significance of all that is simply that this virus and the way it has been managed within our society and around the world has really made some dramatic changes in how many of us live our lives and how we see the past and how we look to the future. We keep on hearing these terms like going on to a new normal. And that itself is really confusing, because if it's new, it can't be normal. In other words, it's implying that what we're going to do is change the basic dynamics of our life. And that's really something that many people have an agenda, that we know that many people in the progressive left see as an opportunity to change society in their concept of what is a better good, a more inclusive, more tolerant society that is very tolerant of just about everything except anybody who disagrees with them, and in particular, not very tolerant of Christians. Many people feel like the shutdown of churches, or the restrictions that were placed upon us, was a direct act of persecution. And I don't really think that that's overtly what's going on in our society. I think what's really happening is that they consider us to be so irrelevant. In fact, they see Christianity as merely just an entertainment venue, something that people might choose or not choose to do on a weekend. In fact, they may be right in many ways, because one of the things we know that most people who consider themselves regular churchgoers actually only attend about one Sunday out of the month. And if you go once a month, you're considered in our society as being a regular attender. That in itself violates the whole concept of what the church is all supposed to be about. The church is a community of people who gather in fellowship. And I wonder if some degree that God's really kind of, in a way, clarifying who really is a follower of Jesus. Because I think there are many people that after this over will become comfortable moving into the video world, essentially the digital world. In fact, one writer put it really well. He said, "What we're moving from a personal religion to a private religion." In other words, I worship God in the privacy of my own home, which is certainly a part of worship, but that becomes the extent of it. I listen to those video programmings that make me feel good about myself, and I like to watch, and don't require a lot of thinking on my part, and certainly don't challenge my faith. And additionally, what it becomes is something that I can do at my convenience. I can check it out or follow along when it fits into my schedule, so that instead of seeing the worship of God as being at the sacred center of my life, I see it as something that is an addendum to my life. And I say that because if you look at the creation story, where God creates 6 days and he rests, and he declares a Sabbath holy, the idea is that there's one day out of the week where we are focusing all of our attention and energy on our relationship with God. And that's the idea of church. The church is a place where we gather together and we really work on growing in our relationship with Christ, and especially in relationship with other people. You see, people are a necessary part of the spiritual growth, because if you don't have people around you, you never have the challenge of learning how to love people who, in many cases, may be really hard to love. It's the very inclusiveness of all who believe that really makes Christianity a unique experience, that we grow together, we don't grow apart. And yet we find that Christianity, as it moves from the personal faith to a private faith, it becomes something that's quite separate from everybody's day-to-day life. And as a consequence, it's something that I engage in personally, but I don't feel any responsibility or obligation to exercise or live it outside of the context of my own personal comfort zone. And at that point, Christianity becomes something very different. It becomes not just a personal faith, but it becomes a private and hidden faith that doesn't really encounter the culture. So this becomes ultimately the challenge. And oftentimes we find that the church is put under pressure by the external culture, where we need to either, fish, cut bait, or get out of the church. In other words, we have to make a decision. Are we going to be engaged in the work of the kingdom, or are we just simply going to keep our faith disengaged, not really plugged into the day-to-day areas of my life, and I begin to live this segmented life? This really leads to what Revelation referred to in Revelation chapter 3, the church of Sardis, chapter 2, where Jesus said, you have a name which you live, you have a reputation for being alive, one translation says, but in actuality you're dead. And so there's a danger there that we end up having a faith that's not activated. Remember what James said, faith without works is dead. A faith that isn't working itself out in the culture is a faith that actually becomes a dead faith. And that's really where I think the enemy wants to take the church. He wants us to become increasingly disengaged from the culture. And, there's complexities that go with all of that. But I would just want to really, I'll stop now because I think I'm about out of time, and I'll pick this up tomorrow. But I think it's important for us to be thinking about this. Are we being pushed in that direction where, as we increasingly digitize our Christianity, that we stop being a presence in the world in a real physical sense, and we just have a virtual presence that people can click on or click off and at their leisure, but never really have to work it out in a real life context? So some stuff to think about. Praying for you this week, and I just ask you to continue to pray for us as I'm meeting again with our leaders, and I'll try to talk a little bit more about where that conversation is going. So God bless you, and go in His grace.